So I was watching this guy going viral at the UCLA graduation. He was showing his laptop with a bunch of ChatGPT prompt, and the story goes that this is how he got basically his degree. That he did all this final project using ChatGPT. I don't know if the story is true, but the conversation trigger this has created is still very, very interesting. AI in schools and education is a topic that started almost instantaneously when ChatGPT and LLMs came out. And they've been covered kind of like in the same, right? Is it cheating? Is it not cheating? Where is really the line that we draw about all this? And the thing that I found very interesting, and it's a colleague of mine that captured this perfectly, is that most students to this point, to this day, have not understood that the point of education is to build skills, not to produce papers, right? And I very much relate to that because I went through my entire educational system without really fully grasping this, right? I mean, there's a very difference between hearing it, which I never did, um, and really fully living it, really understanding that, this is the one thing you got to do when you get out of it. Um, so, what I want to do with this video was to bring a perspective that I haven't really heard anywhere when it comes to AI in education. And hopefully this is going to be interesting. A perspective that comes from the position of being an employer and the interest that we have regarding education, and fundamentally as an advice for students, especially if you go in the tech industry, and what you should do when you're looking into your education. Is going to touch into how you should be involving with AI tools. Before I go there, and before I get bashed with people telling me that I'm an anti-AI guy, I literally use ChatGPT every day. I even use it for generating the thumbnails for these videos because I don't want to be like, making one of these funny things. And I think they look pretty good. They're a very good way to quickly capture in one picture these things. I also use it for coding, not going into vibe coding. So I'm absolutely defending the use of the technology. My point in the context of education is going to be emphasizing onto, the how and why it matters. My bit of the story, started multiple decades ago, but I'm going to anchor it to a conversation I had with a friend of mine a few months back, right? So a French friend of mine, and we're discussing about the state of education in France. So when this conversation topic comes up, which was not the first time I had it, in France there's a high emphasis on the high school degree. It's called the baccalaureate. And fundamentally, the story has gone ever since even I was in high school in France, was that the average skill level is going down. The premise is always the same. The government really wants to have a maximum amount of people who are going to be graduating, so they're compromising on the standard of exits, the kind of question. They remove questions, they remove topics and stuff like this. It goes on like this. It's been going on for decades this way. And he was asking me what was my take on it and the state of the US given my experience. And so, of course, the French system, I haven't really paid attention to it too closely for a long time. It's just that, it's been a trend, like I said, I've been hearing for decades. But in the US, I did. And I did because of the position of an employer. And I'm going to go into deeper detail in a minute, but very quickly, it's just that, you're trying to acquire skills when you hire people. And understanding anything, any kind of understanding of journey that will help you simplify with reliability the understanding of skill is important. So you get yourself involved into where things are going. To summarize a very complicated picture, because I'm not trying to make it as a attack on the educational system, the education system in the US is pretty appalling. From the very beginning, the earliest days, all the way into university level, it's all pretty bad. And I will divide it into two big polarizing buckets, which are really on a common trend of have and have nots, right? So if you do have money, you're going to live in a good place. That good place is going to have access to a decent public system, or a very good one, right? If you don't, you're just left out on the side, right? What will be, will be. And this will go, from elementary school, middle school and high school. It will very much be a defining moment. And this is what has been created the whole let's find a neighborhood where there's good schools around, because he really has a big defining element. Education is a big defining element into your life. And I think I'm going to make that point pretty clear in this video. But when you go into university, you start experiencing the second dimension, which is the one that is related to what I'm going to try to point out. And this is that there is a bit of a trend, and with that perspective, it's hard to see it, but there's a trend to shift more and more of the education down the line, right? So the high school level, the high school teaching is pushing things more and more into university. And from my French perspective, the way it looked is that you kind of like sort of do things as you go by, and then huge inclination when you go into university. Again, there's another angle of have and have nots, because that level of university is extremely expensive. Very few is paid by the government in one shape or another. And that dramatically changes what you're going to be able to have access to. And that trend of shifting the knowledge into the university is really one of the core points that I want to be making. So with my friend, when I was telling him, he was, commenting on, how bad it is that you don't invest in education. And it is. I mean, I consider it being almost a national security problem. But what I told him at the time was that what's going to happen when the educational system no longer hold the line of skills for these exams, for all these different things, to guarantee that you really do have these skills, is that what they're basically doing is that they're offloading this responsibility into the employer, to the private sector. And what that means is that if your exam is no longer gatekeeping this, you're going to have this exam at the interview process. You're going to have this exam at the job market. Now, the difference is the employer doesn't care. The employer cannot care, doesn't have the time, doesn't have the money to actually do this whole ramping you up into the skill set. Now, I'm simplifying this picture because it's not a 100% true, but it's better that you leave off with that expectation than thinking that you're going to be able to piggyback into the handful of companies who are going to be having bootcamp programs and being able to bring you in on a 2-3 months ramp up to fill in some of the skill gap that you have. So much, much safer, especially in this context now of AI, especially as you start seeing that, software jobs are getting a little bit more difficult to obtain. All this context, it's better that you leave it this way. And this system of the skill that goes out this way is what I call the educational inflation. Education skills inflation. Now, this inflation is a bit of a weird one. Typical inflation would be that you spend more to get the exact same thing. So the quality doesn't change, or the quantity doesn't change what you're really getting, but you got to be putting more in to get it. So in this case, it's more like a shrinkflation, but it's been happening for a long, long time. It's a case of death by 1,000 cuts that AI can only accelerate. And so what it means is that a degree, right, in any way, shape, or form, from even the smallest things, the smallest certificate that you would have for like a 4-day training program, all of these things are ways of summarizing a longer list of skills that you would have, right? Rather than spending an hour going through a checklist, you have a master's degree, that means this. And the school, the institution that you went to get it, is another part of that entire simplification, right? So you say, I'm an engineer from MIT, it carries weight, right? Or at least it used to. And I think it's going to continue, but at least it used to in the context of the inflation. And my point is that this is carrying less and less weight. Not in a visible, perceivable manner, but in a way that has already shifted and changed the interview process. And that's the part that is bad for students, because they come in out of school convinced that they've been properly trained, convinced that their degree is going to do a lot of the work, and then they find a harsh reality. One where the interview process, like I mentioned, has changed, is getting longer. This is where you start having these 9-session panels, coding exercise at home, live coding things. And it's like a never-ending validation of your skills, because fundamentally, I can't trust your degree anymore. By there was already this problem in the degree things. And in my own personal educational journey, one of the big problems that I had with degrees is when I started to realize that of the 300 or so kids that we had in 1 year, there was a huge difference of skills. Huge variance between the best one and the worst one. But that's kind of like where it gets really bad for them, because the reason the employers are having these kinds of recruitment process, there's of course more than just the educational. There's companies who just don't know how to do things, that they overlay or they over things. It's a risk management effort to interview people. But this is fundamentally because you just can't take at face value. And what it creates is, again, you come in, no one really cares about you. No one is really going to be here to ramp you up. No one is going to be here to give you feedback. If you get any of these things, count yourself lucky, because you're one of the few, right? And also this is why you start seeing, we've seen more and more people have a master's degree, and there's this overbidding in terms of skills. And you go around the stories like, in the 70s, you could get like a full-time job with walking into a shop. And now I have a master's degree from Stanford and I'm struggling. I'm sure nobody from Stanford is struggling, but you get my point. And that's fundamentally because of this education skills inflation. And this started way before AI was even a thing. So the introduction of AI and LLMs in all this conversation has just accelerated the entire mechanics. And this is back to this guy in his video in here. What he's creating is a bit of a pandemic effect to it. When the pandemic hit, a lot of people were wondering like what's going to happen to the education of all these people who are going to be graduating. And there were already conversation about, those who graduate that year are going to be enjoying a leniency that's going to actually devalue their degree compared to other people. I don't think it really had any significant impact. I haven't heard anything, at least on my side. But that's a similar thing that's going to happen, is that, people are going to start asking like, yeah, but, have you actually earned your degree? And if I can't know what kind of student you've been behind the degree, I'm going to stab that in the degree altogether. Now, these, again, I'm making this very contrasted and colorful arguments so that they're really here to be grasped. I'm not saying that right now everybody is in full-on denial of the validity of the educational system. But that's what the AI is doing. It's accelerating. It's making it easier for you. And the funny thing about AI is that it's been often compared to a calculator, as people were trying to wrap their head around the technology of it. And I really like that argument. And I really like that argument because I have a very relatable story about this. When I was in high school, I did what's called scientific section in France. And so we did a ton of math, ton of physics, ton of biology and stuff like this. And in math, one of the things we had to do was called function analysis. So you were given like a function and you had to break it down and then write a couple of things. It was like clear steps to actually do it. We were using these calculators, graphic calculators, right? TI-89 kind of calculators. And already back then, which is more than 20 years ago now, there was already programs, not one that I wrote, that will allow you to do the entire work. You would put in your function into it, right? You didn't have to write it. You could download it on the internet. And then you could just like put this into your calculator. You put in the function, press enter, boom, ChatGPT style, step by step, exactly what you had to write, exactly what you had to say. And of course, in this context, that created the exact same narrative that we have right now. And the narrative is always the same. It's that, any tool that you have, this calculator and the AI, if it's here to help you build the skills, there's no problem. But if it's here to help you produce the paper, now that's a problem. And in my context, there was a big conversation. Were we going to be allowed to have the calculator for the federal exam? With a wind of panic, because you become dependent on the calculator. This is kind of how you learn, right? And eventually we weren't allowed to have them and everything went fine, right? We still had the time to finish the work on time. No catastrophe happened. But the funny, interesting piece for me is, again, like this whole, hey, this is why I'm going to remove the calculators, because the temptation of you using it to produce the paper rather than building up the skills is just too big, and I don't have the control mechanism to guarantee that, you're building the skills in my way of assessing that you've built the skills. The exact same paradigm is coming with AI. Now, I'm not advocating for the ban of AI, and the argument that people are going is like, oh, the skill that you got to develop, etc. Now, this particular argument for me is a bit fragile. Let's call it like this. Because the skill necessary to use ChatGPT are non-existent. And more importantly, they have to be non-existent for the very essence of what these products are supposed to be. All of these AI agents, they only work if just about anybody can use them by just talking to them. The skills have to be, I can talk to you. It's not even barely literacy. It's just because eventually you're going to be able to just voice talk to them. So what's the skill that you have in here? If we're talking about understanding how to build these AI models, understanding how neural networks are being built, the different kinds of algorithms, the training methodologies, reinforcement learning, GANs, and all these different other techniques that exist in AI, I'm all for it. But none of that stuff is going to happen before high school, right? This is like, I mean, with a few exceptions, it's very, very complicated mechanisms that you need a lot of foundations just to wrap your head around. And I'm not talking about just going through a tutorial and then slapping a couple of PyTorch into something or TensorFlow and having something that is working and you not understanding any of it. So, this is like, yeah, of course, you should not be scared about the technology. You should not be pushing it out. You should learn how to use it. You should develop the skills. But really, the conversation at the educational level is that are you using these tools to develop the skills or produce the paper? So the funny thing about this situation is that when this guy was like this with his laptop, everybody around him was cheering. And I'm sure it's because of the graduation, finally getting to the finishing line. But the interesting part for me is that they should not be cheering at all. They should probably be pissed off. Because as this guy is basically doing all of these things, it casts a shadow of doubt over the validity of all of the people around the room. And was he the only one? This? Maybe other people have done the exact same thing as he's done. Maybe, these people who have their degree haven't really earned it. He is, at that moment, adding his little bit of inflation into the education value of the people in the room. I don't even know what degree, what they've been studying, but it casts like, an element of doubt that probably is going to anchor to the first invisible, probably would be anchored to UCLA. So it's like, hey, this guy managed to go through the nets because probably at UCLA they don't have the real proper control over these things. I don't think at this point anybody has. I'm not trying to do a UCLA point. But my point is that you should not be happy that the guy next to you is making the case in point that your degree isn't worth what it was a year ago, before all this was in place. But that's, again, I'm tying it up to the fact that most students don't understand that not only the point of education is to build the skills, but it's your responsibility as a student to build the skills. Now, there's a very interesting concept that is important to me. The difference between responsibility and fault. It's not fair, it's not fun, but it's true, right? There's a lot of situations in life that are not your fault, but they end up being your responsibility. And in this case, it's the student's responsibility to develop the skills, despite the educational system, etc. And you can come around and comment on all sorts of things that I would agree with. You can comment on the fact that you pay more for the education and you get less. I would totally agree with you. That the attention is less than it was. I would totally agree with the entire conversation. But here's where I anchor this whole thing down. When you graduate, you're going to go into the workforce. When you're going to start talking to people about things, the school is not going to be around you. The parents are not going to be around you. The friends are not going to be around you, etc. It's going to be your name in front of a panel of people who are going to be here to assess whether or not you have the skills for what they need to do. And then once the feedback about your level is going to be put together into the interview system, that's going to become a tiny bit of reputation that's going to be attached to your name. And no one's going to come around and say, like, yeah, Jerry came to the interview, he went from UCLA, really didn't have the skills, but I'm sure it's not his fault. It was because, the UCLA, the educational inflation is just impacting him, etc. That's not how people see it. That's because the workforce, the employer, doesn't have the means to care. So they just brutally don't. And the way it manifests itself is as you go through these interviews, you're not given feedback. You're not given information. You're not giving anything. You're given silence at best. I mean, go look online, the feedbacks and the stories that people have when they go through interviews and they don't even get a rejection letter. Now it is this all this is mediocrity. You should get something, but again, you can comment on how bad this is, or you can actually start preparing yourself for the reality that it is. The difficulty is that I'm trying to really single out an element in here that is in the hand, something that students can do today in a context that has more than one factor as things are going in. Because the interview process in companies isn't messy just because of the education inflation. You're not getting any answers after your interview. It's not just because of the education inflation. And then if an interview goes bad, it's not just because you don't have the skills, right? There's a plethora of companies who just don't know how to interview people. They have messed up processes. They have messed up recruitment teams and flows. So you don't get the answers out of all these different things. But the truth is, if you're someone who don't have the skills, your chances of hearing like, hey, we like you or like whatever, but you just don't have it are 0 to none. And because there's nothing in it for the company to tell you that. It's a huge risk and exposure for you to take it and trying to make it maybe a lawsuit or a discrimination case or whatever. So they'll tell you something like you've heard 1,000 times before. Thank you so much for your interest. We've been so lucky to have so much interest in this position, and we had to make hard decision, and so we went with another candidate, right? Why do you do these things? Because you're done, right? I already give you my time. I already spent my resources to evaluate your skills, and I had to do quite a bit of it. So now I need to move on as fast as possible to the next person because I'm here to build something and not here to build you. They will be here to build you if you're being hired. But until then, they're not here for you. They're not here to compensate for the weaknesses of the education system. Now, if you want to go into the fault of who's responsible for this whole thing, it's a complicated picture, but just to give you like a little bit of closure to anybody that is here as a student. The fault is the educational system. Now, I don't really like this whole like, the system is bad, these ghostly figures that you point the finger to. So I want to give you like a little bit more of a specific reach on my personal take on this whole thing. You have a series of actors in the educational system. And at this point in time, over the past decades, it's all been about money. Not greed, about money. So in the US, really everything is about profit. And there's been this constant ramp up and ramp up and ramp up in cost of things because everybody wants to make more money. There's nothing wrong with that. But what you've seen is basically these degrees that started to open doors and started to really be the validation that you had these high valued skills that translated into high paying jobs. They ended up being marketed left and right to just about anybody to have them. The temptation to mass produce these degrees and compromising on the quality of these degrees is just too big. There's just too much money to be made. And that's where you start reconciliating the cost of education from 30 years ago to what it is today, right? It's because this whole thing is going on. Now, the default mindset in the US is to let the market correct. Sometimes the market correction takes too long, like it's going into the educational market, etc., because the employers, they still need qualified people, so they're still putting up with inflation, so they're still accepting that little creep up. And that's where you find yourself in. We have to spend a huge amount of money in the education for a diminishing value, and this is still your best shot to actually land a good job. So you're going on with the system. Now, if you look into Europe and the French system in particular, when it comes to high school, the public education in Europe that is paid by the government is costing a ton of money for countries who have less and less money to spend on these things. And this creates a bit of a pressure where you have less and less means to achieve the same goals or even more, right? And that's ending up a money problem, but on the resource management side of things, etc. So the reason about this whole, this fault is being complicated, being on multiple people, is just that this is really where the responsibility lies into trying to correct and address these things. I'm not a politician. I'm not going to tell you how you fix these things. But I want to try to bring it into like, you got this fault that is lying into the hands of multiple actors at a very large scale on something that you as a student are not going to be able to change anything. What you can do is actually work on these skills yourself, take advantage of everything that's going on, kind of suck it up if your educational system around you is not what it is, and then go the extra mile. This does not stop into when you're out and you have graduated. You got to be building your skills outside of the educational system, build your own educational system. I very much tell people, whoever is interested to, that we live in a golden era of education, despite everything I just said, because there is so much information online, so much stuff for free. It's just that it has changed face. And it's big, you probably could look at this as a market correction. Maybe me doing this video right now, educating a little bit on the few things in my perspective is part of this market correction. But the point is, you now have more means than ever to learn how to do things, to develop real skills. You might not necessarily have the rubber stamping that a degree from a prestigious university is going to do, but you'll be able to develop the skills. And if you do that, you're going to be fine. You're just going to have to demonstrate that you really do have the skills, but you're going to be fine. And in short, basically, you got to watch after yourself, because in the workforce and when you're going to get there, no one else will.